levels that you make those transitions, you actually have to let go of stuff that made you really good in the previous role and sort of embrace new skills that you didn't have before. And as someone that works a lot with leaders, it's having them let go of those things that were really some of their, comfort, and like in my case, feeling really competent because I could do something really well, and moving into something that was, less unsure of, feeling less confident about. I know, I was actually on maternity leave with my second daughter, and they called me and wanted me to take over as the director of HR for this company I was working at the time. And I had like 2 sleepless nights because I always wanted to be a director of HR, and at the same time, I just had this baby. And actually I ended up turning it down because I wondered, was that the right thing? Was that not the right thing? But I was just sort of feeling so overwhelmed in the moment, that I just couldn't face going back and stepping into this larger role and having this, this newborn. Fortunately, I had another chance later on to actually become a director of human resources. But I think it's trying to again find the, find those things that when you're okay to go forward and when you're not, because it's really challenging, balancing a family. I mean, I took jobs at times where I knew I didn't have to travel because the kids were little and I just, couldn't travel. And so a big part of it's knowing, what you want and what you want to get out of your life. When you talk about transitions, I think also I had this fear that, well, if I was a director, I was going to have to work really, really hard. And then I realized I worked really, really hard anyway. So it was sort of the ambivalence in me about, did I want it, did I not want it, what do I do? And I guess, sitting on the other side of it now, I would say that, a lot of how you're working is your own sort of work ethic associated with that. And actually, as you move up through an organization, and certainly if you're an entrepreneur, and as Wendy was talking about, sometimes you get to make the calls because you're more in a position of authority to say, well, we're not doing it then because it's working around my schedule versus not. So I would actually maybe encourage you all to be a little less hesitant than I may have been at certain points in my life, but you do have to figure out what that core is and what you can manage at any particular given point. And you just have to learn to let go of some things.
Thanks, Karen. My next question is for Julie and Maithili. I'm not sure if I think Julie hasn't revealed this yet, but Julie actually comes from a bicultural background. Her father was Pakistani. And so the question that I would be interested to hear from Julie and Maithili is your thoughts on what is the role of culture been as you've gone about setting your career. And in particular, I think many of us have experienced the expectations of parents, Pakistani parents, Indian parents who have certain expectations. I know my own parents, their expectation was that each of their kids should be a doctor. Which I'm sure rings true for many people here. And so I was wondering if you both could just talk about that and the role of culture in your career.
Well, I absolutely had to deal with that from my father. And I was, a nervous wreck before I had to tell him that I wasn't going to be practicing law anymore. But, I think that coming from that type of background and influence, you start getting that messaging very early. And at least for me, I felt like my self-worth was wrapped up in pleasing my father and attaining this kind of professional label so that it could make him proud. I think from a cultural perspective, that's very common. That's part of what drove me to go to law school. And I think that when I did that, I was mainly doing it to, there was a big part of it that I was doing to please my father, and it did. But at some point, for me, the pros and the cons column became very uneven when I started really experiencing a lot of unhappiness in my life and in my work life. I had no personal life, and I think I hit that point where it wasn't worth it anymore to sacrifice my own happiness in order to please my parents. And it was a very big deal for me to have to tell them that I was no longer going to be a lawyer. I mean, my father still tells his friends that I'm a lawyer. so, which is fine. But and for me, I really went through a lot of kind of soul searching on how I was going to approach both of them and talk to them about it, and it was the best decision that I've ever made. And I think that at the end of the day, your parents want you to be happy, and so I had built this big kind of monster in my head that I thought I was going to be encountering, and at the end of the day, he was, I think he was disappointed, but he was happy that I was happy. And so I don't know how many of you are experiencing that type of dynamic with your own parents, but for me, it was prevalent, and it was an event that I had to deal with. And because I was so thoughtful about it and logical with my father about why I was doing what I was doing, I think it made things a lot easier. So, I just look at kind of where I am now and how happy I am and what I'm doing, and I would never change anything. And you deal with what you're given, and I grew up in a household with a lot of pressure to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and that formed me to a certain extent in a very positive way, but also I felt like I developed enough skills in my adulthood to be able to address the issue with my parents and successfully transition.
Thank you. Maithili?
So I've actually had a very interesting family experience. My parents were not very ambitious, like most Indian parents, in the sense, they would have been happy if I had a bank job in India, a steady income job. But that said, they were incredibly supportive of everything I did. Right from when I was very young, I pushed the envelope a lot, and their patience a lot. I'd take part in every dramatics event in school. I'd be in every speech and debate tournament, and I'd force them to take me places where I had to go present on weekends. So they got a flavor for what was to come for the most part, and they were incredibly supportive. My mom, as I mentioned earlier, was very supportive of my decision to come here on my own for graduate school. And just when they were getting used to the fact that all I wanted to do in my life was a PhD, I jumped ship and announced I wanted to do something else. But they always supported me. When I had my child and I was right in the middle of, I always joke, for most of us women, our career clock and biological clock tick at the same time. I don't think they, one stops and the other starts, or they reverse, right? So I had my daughter when I was at the peak of my performance at work as well, or my career, but my dad took voluntary retirement and came here. And they were the best support system I could have, or my kids could have, growing up here. And they have been here since then. My children have never been in daycare because they've always had grandparents taking care of them. So they were fairly non-traditional Asian parents in that respect, in the sense that they've always supported whatever I did. And I think that's what allowed me the luxury of being adventurous and taking risks that I have. So it worked in my favor a lot.
I'm just cognizant of the time. I'm going to ask one last question for the panelists, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. The next question deals with the issue of mentors and role models, which hopefully folks will be staying for the lunch. That it's intended to be an opportunity to folks to actually also maybe begin some of that mentoring and developing those relationships. Could you tell us about the importance of mentors and role models? Why is it important to have them? What have you found? Who have you found to be good mentors and role models? Any particular advice, particularly for women professionals as they seek a mentor who's the right fit? And I'll ask Karen to lead off with that.
Yeah, thanks. So Wendy talked a little bit about mentoring was one of the words she used when she was talking about networking. So let me maybe define mentoring a little bit and